Hiya. So a very simple way of playing changes, which I find especially useful on tunes or sections of tunes that don't really change key but have some funny chords in. And a very good example of that might be, for instance, a 12-bar blues, a old swing tune like Lady Be Good, or the A section of a tune like Rhythm Changes, or Have You Met Miss Jones, which is kind of turnaroundy or in the same sort of key, and then the B section modulates but the A section stays within the same key, that sort of thing, right? And it's just something I kind of worked out at the piano when I was just playing chords. And what I noticed is that if I just made a beeline for the notes of the chords that weren't in the key, and used this in combination with something simple like a major minor blues, or some diatonic playing or something, it actually really brought the harmony to life and started to sound like bebop incredibly quickly. And then, while I would recommend anybody to try this out at the piano, and this is probably the best way to understand it, I'll try and explain it on the guitar today. Now, I find this most useful in the sort of beginnings of solos where I'm really not trying to play too many notes, where if you use something like lots of bebop licks or chord scale ideas or something like that, it can really clutter things up. So I'm going to start with a very simple example, which is a blues, and we're just going to start with a very simple version of the blues, which is kind of like the old school sort of blues that would have played in the 1930s. So it goes C6, F7, C6, C6, F7, F7, C6, C6, and then maybe a 2/5 here, D minor, G7, or D minor, maybe up there might sound better, and then C6. So the whole thing goes like this. This is the kind of version of the progression you might hear from old like 1930s swing records. Things like Benny's Bugle, or maybe the soloing section of Royal Garden Blues with Charlie Christian, So while we wouldn't necessarily play that version of the blues in modern jazz, it is quite a useful template for building up to more complex versions of the blues, which we're going to do in a second. A couple of things to note: it's a C6, not a C7 on the 1, and we're playing a sort of 2/5 there instead of, or just a G7 chord even, instead of like G7 F7 like you'd have in the Chicago blues. That's an innovation of later on. That's like a 1950s chord progression, and we're sort of stuck in the 1930s at the moment. Plus it kind of makes it more understandable when you have like things like bebop blues that don't have that F7 chord in there. So in terms of what chords are chromatic, well, this one's fine. C6 belongs to C major, same with G7, but this F7 has, instead of an E, has an E flat. And of course with the C major key, it's very easy to tell what notes are outside of the key because they're just the ones that are flat or sharp. Let's have a little improvisation. I'm going to use the C major pentatonic as my basic kind of thing, and then I'm going to move to the E flat when required. So. And you'll hear players like Lester Young and Charlie Christian often using that kind of simple idea, and it kind of goes into people like Chuck Berry and kind of jump blues going into R&B, going into early rock and roll kind of tradition, which actually buds off from Charlie Christian just as much as modern jazz does. Anyway, let's just investigate a certain motive approach, which is really useful for kind of bringing this technique to life. You hear it a lot. I'll give you an example from the modern jazz repertoire, which is Tenor Madness. And Tenor Madness does this thing. That's all right. So this is just like moving the same motive, which is based on a C6 chord, and then just going from E to E flat. Okay, which is a kind of classic swing era technique. You can think of things like the kind of like Benny Goodman backing figures or whatever. that you get in that kind of music, and perhaps Sonny Rollins is harking back to that era with that tune. Okay, let's add in some more chords. So let's add in a A7 flat 9 in bar 8. Let's change it up a little bit. And this chord has not one but two chromatic notes, a C sharp and a B flat. The C sharp is a raised 1 and the B flat is a lowered 7th. Right, okay, and then we're going to have make it a bit more beboppy by having a G7 flat 9 in there. The 7 flat 9 chord in that kind of situation is very bop, right? It's Charlie Parker's favourite sound, basically. So if we put this in here on the 5/7, we've got one chromatic note, which is the flat 6 of the key. But it's good to get the 7th in there, even though it's not chromatic. That note does not belong to the major blues scale. And I also like it if we go from this one, a little bit of D minor triad, C major in. If you're a fan of like the Partimento stuff, that by the way is a Monte. No, sorry, a Fonte. I always get that wrong. A Fonte. It's a sort of thing you might find in the B section of a minuet. Okay, no one cares. Let's move on. Right, so let's have an improvisation with that. So that's pretty good, I think. And another thing you can do is you can quite simply incorporate the minor blues scale on the 4 degree, which always sounds great. So we can go. We can also use it on rhythm changes. Rhythm changes has the same chords as this jazz blues, just in a different order. So the first sort of section, if we do it in B flat, that's all diatonic to B flat. We have that 6, 7 flat 9 sound again, and then 5, 7 flat 9 sound. This is just one version of rhythm changes, by the way. There's loads of different ones. And then we go to, I'm going to use the 7th chord, B flat 7, to get to E flat 7. We're going to use. And then again, it's that note. So going through it, so we got, this is all diatonic. Sharp 1, flat 7. We're going to articulate C major. Do those two notes, which is the 7th and the flat 6th. 7th, flat 3rd. Here we go. And you're playing rhythm changes. Last chord progression I want to talk about quickly is the minor blues. And this has got a lovely chord in. So if we just use the C minor pentatonic, we could go to F minor pentatonic, but actually I think it sounds fine just to stay on C minor. And that's of course F minor is diatonic to C minor. And then back to. Now this chord has one chromatic note, the A7 flat sharp 11th. The A7 sharp 11th is followed by the G7. Are the notes, are the chords that you will most commonly find in the turnaround of a minor blues. So this is a flat 7 sharp 11th, and this has one chromatic note, which is the G flat, which happens to be the flat 5. G7 raises the 7th. So we play a blues scale here. With the G7, take the C blues and raise it up by a half step, the B flat. So we're playing kind of like a minor blues with a major 7th in it, if you can imagine such a thing. So it sounds like this. Pretty hip, huh? Pretty like smoky blue note. The last thing that I want to point out about this is if we just like treat it as if it's in a natural minor scale. It's probably better to play Dorian for the first chord. It's a bit more jazz, but we'll leave that out for the minute. For this first chord, A7 sharp 11th. If we flatten the 5th again, we actually get this scale, which is actually A flat Lydian dominant, just by changing one note. And we get to this one, we take the natural minor, we raise the 3rd up by half step, and we get the harmonic minor. Sounding like this. Coming into the turnaround. How hip is that? It's just the smoothest way to play. Anyway, thanks for watching.